Okay, who we are. My name is Mutana Subaya, and I'm part of 350. 350.org, we are in 188 countries. This is the Ottawa chapter. And we have a three-part mission in Ottawa. First, climate education. So we organize events such as these to raise awareness of the crisis and what we can do about it. We are also very actively involved in the divestment campaigns across Ottawa. So the universities, churches, for the First Unitarian Church, I don't know if there's anybody here from First Unitarian. Yeah, they were the first to divest, and they announced that last year, and we supported them. We also are involved in direct action campaigns, such as participating in protests and marches, etc. Our guest today is the author of the book Radical Simplicity. He's also the founder of the Global Living Project. He was a military engineer and was deeply influenced by the Valdez project and the Valdez disaster, as well as the invasion of Iraq. And that prompted him to rethink what he wants to do and devote his life to sustainability and world peace. Jim has also founded the Alternative Transportation Task Force. He has lobbied in Washington for wilderness, peace, and Native American rights. He's delivered numerous workshops on sustainable living, and we are honored he's here with us this afternoon. So please join me to give him a warm welcome.
Well, it's already been said, what a gorgeous day out there, and Elizabeth and Mudana and the children, we went walking in the park and had a great morning, and just walking around your city. I haven't been here in maybe 20 years. The last time I was here as an arms dealer, meeting with the Canadian military. So, and I remember being in Montreal and I saw a graffiti said, "Too many causes, not enough rebels." And I mean, I was in my tie going to, and I said, boy, that affects me. Seriously, that little graffiti really did a lot of damage to me. I started really thinking about what I was doing. But we had a great day this morning, and I got to see all the cyclists out about in your city, and I was a little envious, to be quite honest. Here, let me work my way through this. Thank you. And I want to open by asking you to imagine a world, say, 20 years in the future, and the degrowth has happened. And we have world peace. And aside from that, carbon levels are stabilizing and going down. And we made all the changes that people have talked about since the 60s. We finally really did it. And we made peace, and populations are going down in a compassionate way, and it's working. And you wake up one morning and the first thing you do is you start playing your to-do list in your head while you're laying in bed, and you're thinking all the things you have to do, and you feel a little stress in your bed. But then you remember, I'm in a sustainable world. And so a big smile comes across your face as you're laying in bed, and you gaze out your window and you see the trees, and they see a bird maybe in the tree outside your window. And you're now living in a sustainable world. What does that feel like? Just want you to capture a feeling of that in your own body. How does it feel inside to say, wow, living in a peaceful, sustainable world? And then imagine you're going to get up and maybe you're going to take a shower, but where's the hot water coming from? And where's it going after it leaves your house in a sustainable way? And maybe you're going to find out a little news, but you're probably not going to get it from a newspaper that's 60% advertising and then thrown away. How might you get a little word about what's happening in the world in a sustainable way, and what's at your breakfast table to eat? Who's at your breakfast table with you in your dream of a sustainable world? Who are you together with? And then what do you go off to do during the day to keep this world sustainable? What are you going to go off to do? So with this exercise, I'm going to ask you to join me in a game I call television. And what you do is you get to television to the person you're sitting next to. So for 1 minute, I'm going to ask you to partner up. So you two, and then perhaps you two, and then you might turn around to the person behind you and see if you can find a person to talk to for 1 minute. And the way the rules of this game are very simple. Is for 1 minute, one of you is going to be a visionary, and the other is the active listener. And the active listener's job is to put a facial expression on your face like you can't wait to hear more, but don't actually say anything. And if you're a Canadian, like a true-blooded Canadian, you might say, yeah, oh yeah, yeah. I love the Canadians are active listeners. You know, Americans aren't like that. So if you want to do yeah, oh yeah, you just keep them talking for 1 minute. When 1 minute's up, I'll say, okay, everybody, take a deep breath, and then you're going to switch roles. So now the visionary becomes the active listener. So you get to tell a vision about what it would be like, feel like, taste like, smell like to be in a sustainable world, okay? That degrowth has happened. So has everyone found a partner? Someone? Everyone? Well, what's very powerful to me just listening and being witness to your visions is that we can vision. And I think when you can see it, taste it, smell it, and feel it, you can do it. You know, that's the first step. You know, is to really envision it in our minds. And, you know, when you have this long, crazy drive across, you have these public radio programs. And just yesterday there was one about how when the brain is playing fearful things, the body is starting to react and becomes absorbed with creating a story. And when the body is plays a tape for itself of being happy and fulfilled and thankful and loving, it'll just grow. So the neural circuitry becomes more powerful for us when we play those tapes of our visions to our friends. And our job as friends, when our friends want to share their visions, is not to throw water on their visions and tell them all the reasons why it won't work, but to encourage them to dream on and dream on and dream on, and I think we'll get there. So, you know, it's a powerful time. And for me, I'll share my basic degrowth story was when I saw the Valdez oil spill. I was in a 5-star hotel in Stockholm, Sweden, and I have always dreamed, I was a cyclist, I'd always dreamed of going to Alaska by bike and seeing this one really wild place. And I basically was at the bar crying when that spill happened. And I promised myself when I got home I would not drive the car. You know, I knew I had to get out of the car. And I didn't know what to do. But when I got home, I parked my vehicle with a lot of determination. And I had pannier bags from bike touring. I got them all mounted on my bike, and I started going to the grocery store and doing all my errands by bike, you know. And then I started making bigger donations to all the organizations that I loved. And then at one point, I was having, I would say, like an ethical hemorrhage. You know, I couldn't live with myself anymore working in the arms industry, because I was learning that the U.S. had like 50 covert operations happening in the 80s. Each was designed to support whatever faction is favorable to U.S. business interests, and the other faction usually is trying to spread the wealth among the people more, and they may be called communists or socialists, but in the U.S. we called anyone like that our enemy, and we would do anything to them, you know, that we felt like doing. The largest military the world's ever seen. I didn't know that. I was a young or conservative kid, you know. I was just totally naive. Got through college naive. And when I started seeing it firsthand, like I was being asked to sell to both sides of conflicts. I was selling top secret electronics and being asked to sell to Iraq and Iran at the same time. How could we do it? I was being asked to sell to Turkey, who had tortured like 250,000 people. And I go to my boss and say, how can we sell to this? And they said, no, the State Department tells you who you could sell to. You don't have to worry. I said, but I designed this. I was a senior engineer. I was the designer of this BlackBerry. It was a handheld computer that could work underwater. It could work you could throw it against the deck of a battleship, and it could transmit top secret information. And it had a full keyboard, and you could skin diver could use it. And at 27, I was like 20 other people working for me, and I was like flying high, and this smart kid who's designing this thing. And I said, wait, I have an ethical responsibility for how it gets used. And the bosses are just going crazy, like in their mind. They don't know what to say to this young kid who says, how can we sell to this horrible government? But I knew at one point I was in the wolf's den, and I stayed there for an extra 2 years because I want to learn everything about our military-industrial complex. So when people say, oh, but we need to be over there for these lies that they tell you, I know now that it really is mostly fabrications, and it's supporting one of the largest industries and the largest war machine on planet Earth. And basically I had to lock myself in my house finally, and I said, I'm not leaving till I have a solution for me. I got to get out of this. And I got out my engineering economics textbooks and I said, what do I need? And I realized if I took my car off the road, this was 1989, and rented out 3 of the 4 bedrooms in my house and planted a vegetable garden, and I could live the rest of my life just on what I earned by the age of 30. And so I went into work and quit and put my plan into action. 14 years without a car. Have one now, but I was 14 years without a car. And it all worked for me. And I still have the same amount of money I had in 1989. I just have been living off my interest stream and living very simple for the last 25 years. And it's been a very fun life. So I've been able to be a full-time activist without having to make money. If I make some money, it's okay. It helps with life a little bit, but I don't actually have to make money when I go out on the road. So when groups ask me to come, I say, well, I have a sliding scale and it starts at 0 and it goes up. You talk to your organizers and your people and make me an offer, but I never say no. And I just go out and do my work. And it's been a fun 25 years. So I'll share some of that story and get into this topic of degrowth. And maybe we'll turn the lights down just a little bit if possible. And really what we're talking about is creating a balance with nature. And that's the heart, in the sense, of the degrowth movement. And, all of us are paying attention. I know I've talked with Anna and the other 350 groups, and I feel like I'm in my own community when I look out at the faces of people who really care and are learning a lot about what's happening on the planet. So I know I'm amongst a room of very savvy people who get this. That, we're in the 6th grade extinction. Population and consumerism are growing right now, still exponentially. We are facing a time when we have to make severe, really bold changes. It's a time when that's necessary. And this is my boy Walden, who's 5 years old, and when I think of his life, the most dangerous thing we can do is the status quo. And it's very risky. We're putting the world in uncharted territories, as you know when you study climate. The Earth hasn't seen this kind of carbon levels in 4 million years. We're in uncharted territory. Like, we've had glaciers a mile thick, and it's been different. We're in an anomaly of carbon levels right now. But humanity has the capacity to transform, and so my story of transformation is like from a Republican kid to a eco-radical like Jim Green, I'm just like the most bleeding heart liberal kid you can imagine. But my parents were very conservative, and I also found a lot of commonality with the conservative values. They were part of this conservative value that conservative means you don't destroy the earth. Conservative means you get the government off the back of the people, not telling them how to live, who to marry, and all these crazy things that our conservatives tell us to do these days. But we can be beautiful and we can be brutal. And it's a thing of cultivating this shift that we want to see in society within ourselves, and then it'll be more powerful when it goes out. And part of my own experiment, it's enabled me to be a war tax resistor, because I do not want to give 1 penny to the largest military the world's ever seen, the biggest arms dealer on the planet, bar none. I just don't want to give them any of my money. So when I earn below the taxable level, legally I don't have to give them any taxes. I starve the beast as best I can, but it's also meant, like, my goal is not to have the smallest footprint, but it's more to have the most fun with the smallest footprint. And I think that a lot of us play with this because it is fun, because we have more freedom, more creativity, you learn to do things you never tried before. But my hidden agenda was if people free themselves from the working world as much as they can, they have more time to be a professional thorn in the side. To shift society and to be cultural creative, or to work whatever field they're working, but to push the envelope. We don't all have to work on climate, but there's 1,000 things we can do that are in any field that we have an expertise in. We can either do it in a sustainable way or an unsustainable way. So we can move any field towards sustainability. So some work better from the inside, and some work better from the outside. But wherever you work best is a place to work, and the place that brings you joy. And when you get up, you really want to get to work. This is the finances of what's happened for me. I did use the book, Your Money or Your Life, 4 years into my plan. In 1989, I quit. I decided to live off my interest stream, and I did all the math because I was trained in, I went to engineering, but I also did like a minor in business. So I knew how to run numbers and how to do finances and do multi-million-dollar business deals for my company. When I did it for myself, I said, let me get my spending down, and while the earnings are going up, and then my savings are, the bottom line is my savings, and that's the interest income from my savings. So interest is slow. First, your interest stream is very small, but once it gets to a certain size, it grows more quickly. And when that circle there is called the crossover point. When my monthly income from my savings is equal to my monthly spending, that's the day I was free and clear. So that happened at age 30 in 1989, and it's been that way ever since. And I calculated back, if I had known this information in high school, I could have quit at 27. Bummer, man. I worked for 3 stupid years when I didn't have to. And I wasn't making big money until, at the end when I quit, I was making 45 grand a year, but the year before was like 42, the year before 39, the year before I put myself through 8 years of college. My dad was a truck driver, and 9 kids in the family, so not a single penny for any of us to go to college. We either got scholarships or paid our own way. So I worked jobs the whole way through college. After 8 years of school, graduated, no debt. And I could have still done all that and retired at age 27. Using the same tool of this book, Your Money or Your Life, or Simplicity. And you know what the growth paradigm has been. The paradigm the whole way here, on the radio, they tell you the stock market every single day, and you're supposed to have a little, oh, it's down. And when it's up, you're supposed to smile and say, it's up, That's what they're telling you. They're brainwashing us into that, Every university in the nation is going to teach you that, except for a few will have like ecological economics taught. But any college is going to teach you growth-based economics. People can't even envision a society that's not growing. They don't know how it works. Like, they're brainwashed into thinking that it doesn't work unless it's growing. And so, this is what growth has, all these consequences that are somewhat unintended. But, we are faced with an option, growth economy or a sustainable economy. So I'll tell you a little bit, which you probably know, about the growth economy. So it risks a complete systemic collapse, uncontrollable climate change, the 6th great extinction, loss of fundamental life support systems, commodity shortages, massive poverty, warfare over resources, and it's happening all through countries that are now getting dry and losing their water and having huge conflicts, and hunger, civil insurrection. The most unstable world I can imagine for my boy and others' children is status quo. Now, if you just look at the growth in GDP over the years from 1880 to 2000, this has shaded in gray the different wars. And my father used to say war is good for the economy. And when he used to say that, it violated my body, because I was a peace kid, really in my heart. Like, I told my dad I'd never go to war when I was like 9 years old. I said, that's for adults who are dumb. But you taught us to be nice to each other and not to fight in the playground. So adults should learn that lesson quickly, like not to hurt each other when they are having a difference of ideas. That they should work it out like we teach. So I told my dad this, and he was not happy. But that's what they do to the economy, is they create all these spurts in consumption of resources. And even Henry David Thoreau, our son is named after Walden Pond, the famous book Walden by Henry David Thoreau. He had to say it 3 times in 1854 even, because his people at the time in New England were carrying a 60-acre farm on their back. He says, when all you need is 1/3 of an acre if you're vegetarian. He was a vegetarian. He says, he could see the farmer coming into the village carrying it on his back. He has so much stress of all that hard work. He said to maintain one's self on the earth is a pastime, not a hardship, if we're to live simply and wisely. This is 1854. His book is like poetry, so beautiful. Like every page, you can just underline the whole book. You don't even have to I had my marker out when I read it like the 5th or 6th time, and you just end up highlighting the whole book. But here, our best and brightest have no better plan than to stimulate you to consume. They say stimulus. Stimulus. What is stimulate? We're going to stimulate you to consume more. He has Cash for Clunkers program. Obama, But it's like, that's their solution, because if they don't get you consuming, all bets are off. Like in 2008, when the economy slowed down and things were happening and all the banks failed, the too big to fail failed, what does Obama do? Increase spending on war, roads, banks, agribusiness. He had such a golden opportunity, but he wasted it. So someday we have to have Bernie Sanders now for Vermont is running for president in America. So I'm going to put all my eggs in his basket, and I hope he beats Hillary. It would be nice to have a first woman president, but not one who's quite a warmonger. You know, we don't need another warmonger, you know, in the office. And it's a bad idea to stimulate consumerism. The planet's finite, we're currently overshooting, and we have way better ideas. And this guy is a Quaker, Kenneth Bolton. He says, anyone who believes in infinite growth in anything physical on a physically finite planet is either mad or an economist. The well-planned option 2, is saying, well, let's really think about how do we grow down in a way that's compassionate, that has no losers, and so we ensure security for all. We ensure the equity question is dealt with, and it's going to require a complete makeover of how we do business. But my guess is that any of us who embark on that are going to find our quality of life going higher when we really get serious about simplicity and sustainability. And the way the people are working on this, the people who are like 350, there's a group for degrowth, that's similar, organizing and getting the consciousness raising, and they have this curve that shows, in the 60s we had the civil disobedience, and when you look at those old films, like they were taking sledgehammers to automobiles, they were burying the engine of a car in 1970 Earth Day. The kids were in the college campuses were saying, U.S. out of the third world. They knew what we were doing over there, and they knew it was wrong. They were going back to the land and living simple. They were anti-consumerism, and then it turned into this, voluntary simplicity movement of the 80s and 90s, and then now, at the peak of that is research and divulgation, and there's all these researchers, scientists at universities. I teach at a university. There's like researchers studying voluntary simplicity and happiness and how people are more happy and how wealth leads to like a stressful life that doesn't bring good things to people, and a focus on consumerism and materialism makes people very isolated and unhappy as they get older, and connection and community is the juice that keeps longevity happening. People are well connected and friends with their community, they live longer, smiling, they're not sitting in their apartment by themselves when they're 85 years old. But the degrowth part, cultural change has to happen at a deep level. Like we have to change almost everything about what we do to have that cultural change. But then, number 5, we're at a sustainable society. We can just go out to the future in a beautiful way with like maybe a billion people on the earth instead of 9 billion. We have 7 billion now. We can go out in the future with a smaller population. So it's a work to both downscale consumption and production and enhance the ecology. If we just look at the growth of population of humans and consumerism growing from, you see where Jesus was dancing on the earth, and it happened quickly, this radical growth. And, we're the generation alive while one species is really devouring all life support systems. And the thing about it is, the 3 factors that primarily drive our impact are our affluence, factored by our population, factored by our technology. So if our technology is twice as efficient, we'd have our impact. If we had half the population, we'd have our impact. And if we had half the affluence, or we earned half as much money, we'd have our impact. And the thing I find very exciting is that all these 3 things I have full control over. Like no one can force me to earn more money or to spend more money, right? Advertisers will try really hard, but they can't make me spend more. And then like how many children I have. Like I could have, say, 20 women dancing around me all wanting to procreate. I'm not saying this ever happened, it's hypothetical. But I can say no, right? I have full control over my fertility, and then the technology. No one can force me to drive a gas guzzler, or to not insulate my house, or to leave the heat on high when I go to work. it's exciting. And the thing is, when people are studying this in detail now, the 9 planetary boundaries, if you look up the Stockholm Resilience Center, they have like hundreds of PhDs studying what do we need to do to create a healthy, functioning biosphere out into the future. And they've identified 9 things that we need to do. And you see the red is the biodiversity loss way out here that's overshooting. The green is the safe operating zone. Nitrogen loading, that's agribusiness. And then this one is climate change, exceeding 400 parts per billion when we should be below 350, and just going up. Ocean acidification is very high. So we're starting to get the information, and we see, we have a congressman in America that comes to the Congress with a snowball in the middle of winter saying climate change is a hoax. Well, he hasn't seen the data. It's colder this winter, but that's weather, it's not climate. This is climate data. Climate data and weather are not the same thing. So, when you look at climate data, we're looking at an anomaly of 800,000 years of ice core data, and the warming is following the trend. So, like I already mentioned, this anomaly, and carbon, levels do go up and down, but it usually is temperature that changes carbon. Now we're finding that carbon is ahead. So we're adding more carbon, and carbon is driving the temperature change. It used to be, all this old ice data is the other way around, is that the sun is changing, the Earth has got a funny orbit, and things get warm and cold, and that warm and cold would change the carbon. Now it's the other way around. So the science is studying this. Like when I teach my students at Unity College, I have about a third, a quarter climate deniers. After I have them read the research, I don't, usually I have a 100% conversion rate of my students. I'm not, just when they see the science, it's pretty convincing. And then we have something I call radical disparity. And if you just compare the richest billion to the poorest billion, the gap is 250 to 1. And right now they say the richest 1% is set to earn more than all the rest of the planet by 2016. And these are the things that I was learning, when this is me on my way to work in California, on the way to do my engineering for the offense industry. And, for me, in a sense, it was a spiritual emergency. I just remember feeling like I can't do anything else with my lifetime than work for peace and for sustainability. It just came so clear to me, like anything else felt like I would feel nervous if I'm just sitting around talking to my family and friends about like things that don't matter, And for a while I lost all my friends almost, because I would want to tell them about how bad everything was. And they'd see me coming down the sidewalk and they would duck down the alley so they wouldn't have to see me and hear my downer, And then I realized, well, this isn't going to work. You can't just depress people. But we need to face the issues. A lot of us are facing it. A lot of times when you first hear all that information, you can walk around the world as a wounded warrior, and it just totally can. I learned for a whole year about the Native American Holocaust, residential schools, and just steeped in it, and didn't turn it off, didn't say that's too depressing, just learned it all. And I felt like raw, like almost like raw, like my skin has been peeled off, But I sat with that, but that feeling led to a feeling like I'm unstoppable at one point, like you're the warrior that's not a wounded warrior anymore. And now you know why you're here on the earth. You're really here to make the world a better place. I don't have another purpose now. Like I'm not here just to have fun. Oh, sure, I'll have plenty of fun on the way, but I'm here to make the world a better place. There's no question in my body, that's why I'm here. And if my job and my 40 hours is not doing that, maybe I have to do it now, but I have a plan. In 3, 5, 8 years, 10 years, maybe it's going to shift, and then it's going to be like working for the mama. That's my inner feeling of how it shifted inside. And this is just like what I learned. This is the U.S. portion of the total world military spending. So 43% of all the military spending in the world is done by my country, and so that gave me like a stronger motivation to work hard, because I need to heal my own country from the inside, and it's not easy, doing whatever I can. Here's Colin Powell justifying the war. I remember watching the TV. He said they were complete lies, because we knew, like if you listen to Democracy Now! And Amy Goodman and alternative media, you'll find in a real time when he was making these accusations, They didn't have a nuclear program, they never found one. They didn't have weapons of mass destruction, they had no ties to Al-Qaeda. All the things that they justified were lies. And then they started something they called shock and awe. This is their words. They say you also take down the city. By that I mean you get rid of their power, water, and 2, 3, 4, 5 days they're physically, emotionally, and psychologically exhausted. Impose this overwhelming level of shock and awe against an adversary to paralyze its will to carry on. So overload an adversary's perceptions and understandings of events that the enemy would be incapable of resistance. So, I was learning this, like this is what we were doing in the 80s. We called it low intensity conflict. That was the U.S.'s strategy. And so if you say, well, for a lot of people in the Middle East, the U.S. is attacking almost close to a dozen countries. 14 countries have been attacked by the U.S. Here's a list of Islamic countries attacked by my government since 1980. And I'll go quickly through these. I just revisited Vietnam. The woman who was famous for this, this picture in the center, a third of her body was had burns, severe burns, when they bombed her village. And here she is afterwards. And there's a beautiful story about her life that you can read online. And this is the photographer who took that picture. And she spent quite a bit of her life talking about what happened in her country. But right now we're facing, like in the US, we have a 50th anniversary of the withdrawal from there. And still in our media, there's this conversation like, oh, was it a good thing? Was it not? Like, it's all sterile. And what was it like the last day evacuating? And there's not really the realization that's 3 million people, Agent Orange completely across the countryside, like defoliating, burning. The damage to the people is so great. And then when you meet a Vietnamese person, often they're like not angry at you for being an American. It's just like, wow. They're communists, and I didn't know what a communist was until I went to India, and I met all these communists, and it was like, they're just farmers, that's who we were. And, Martin Luther King was paying attention at the time, and he did the famous Vietnam speech, Beyond Vietnam. When you hear it, it's so powerful. He says, we must rapidly begin to shift from a thing-orientated society to a person-orientated society. When machines and computers, profit motives, and property rights are considered more important than people, the giant triplets of racism, extreme materialism, and militarism are incapable of being conquered. As an American, we're still in this. The events in Baltimore and Ferguson, we know we're still in the middle of it, and we need to change deeply. And some are calling this the Anthropocene. So this is like the downer part of my presentation, and it's getting close to the end of it. But the thing is, we're at a point when we can make some really big shifts, and I think those shifts are exciting. I'm going to see if this will play. It's the Kibben and some others. I just got this in a few days ago. In my inbox, so I thought I would share it.
When the temperature of some sensor like our body, society, civilizations in some sense are like our bodies. If there's something systemically wrong, it's manifesting all over the place, in all our organs, and that seems to be what's going on in our world at the moment.
The system is failing all around us.
Our infrastructure is falling apart. Our jails are full and can't hold more people. Our young people are burdened with $1 trillion in student debt.
We're in a heap of trouble.
when the temperature of the Earth is starting to rise, that's a very bad sign. Our Earth is running a fever, and it's running it because it's sick in many ways.
In a country like the United States, the fact that anywhere from 45 to 50 million people are hungry, this is a problem.
We can't go on like this. We can't keep moving toward climate catastrophe, nuclear war, persistence of inequality, poverty, famine.
There is a systems problem. These are not one-off issues. They are interconnected, and we have to look at the system as a whole.
It's time to talk about alternatives. It's time to talk about what's next.
We need to be aspirational and be clear about the vision of the world that we want.
What is the system that humanizes us? What is the system that opens up our imagination and possibilities of cooperation?
Nothing is more important right now than to discuss how can we bring about this change.
As systems fail, individual and community creativity explodes, and that's what we have seen. People in this country are solving the problems themselves. They're coming up with new models and strategies, and within those models and strategies are the kernels of a systemic way to move forward.
Land trusts,
Cooperatively owned businesses,
Sustainable energy,
state-owned banks,
Urban gardening, urban farming.
These small successes taken together are a proof of concept that this can happen on a larger scale.
we're compelled to search for alternatives, not just analytically, but in how we live and what we do, how we organize our daily lives. And that has tremendous potential.
our actions and our imagination have to match the magnitude of this problem.
We have to get out of our comfort zone. We must think with courage.
All bets are off in terms of our previous thinking. Our ways of thinking about the economy and our ways of thinking about politics have proven an abject and utter failure. The good news is we have no choice but to adopt revolutionary thinking. I like that. That's the exciting part about this moment. When there are no rules, then people have freedom to invent and to create new things.
I have no doubt that we can create a better America.
If the people who cared about these things really joined together to do something about them, anything is possible.
The biggest worry for me is that we don't try, is that we don't push for what we know is right, for what we know is possible.
It's time for everybody who cares about this country and the future of the planet to do something about it, to get involved.
We can actually do better. We can build a better system. It's not impossible. It's a very American thing to do, to build a new system.
It's a challenge. We can do it collectively, neighborhood by neighborhood, step by step.
I think that the world that we're on the verge of is a bright and beautiful and interesting one, complex, local, interconnected. I hope we get there.
It's time to talk about what's next. Please come and sign our statement at thenextsystem.org.
That came at a time for me that was, I was wondering, what are we going to do? Every now and then it's easy to feel overwhelmed, and I do.
Modern psychology has a word that is probably used more than any other word in psychology. It is the word maladjusted. Maladjusted. I would like to say,
It's the next YouTube up.
Yeah, so I feel quite inspired by this, and I'll show some slides, Naomi Klein's book. And a lot of people are starting to get to this point of degrowth. It's getting more common to talk about, and that's exciting. And that's what they're talking about, is doing a systems overhaul. Buster Brown has put out great books since even the late 1980s with Earthwatch Institute. He says 190 billion alone, that's only 20% of the US's military budget, would actually stabilize world populations, eradicate poverty, and provide education and health care. You know, some of the good things really happening now. This just came over the internet like a few days ago that, you know, for example, Japan is retiring 2.4 gigawatts of oil-fired plants. 43 nuclear power plants have been shut off since Fukushima meltdown. And then, so they have 25 gigawatts of renewable energy, with 80% of that being solar. And, you know, China is putting out cheaper and cheaper solar power all the time. I'm off the grid at home with photoelectric solar and hot water solar, and it's amazing, you know, how people would say, oh, it doesn't work in New England, it's cloudy. Yeah, come over to my house. It totally works, and it's great, and it's more and more cost effective all the time. The cost of the solar panel is probably more than halved in the last 2 or 3 years. So for me, degrowth with no losers is the way to do it. And what it means is, you know, those with too much need to curtail, and they will actually find higher quality life by using less. The ones who have just too much, you know, clutter, and they just have more than they need. And those without enough need more. So we need to grow and help people come out of poverty. So that we're basically fully eradicating poverty, and then, you know, reinventing. Maybe we have to work less. You know, work less hours. People say, how could this work? How can you scale back economy? Well, if I work less, then, and I consume less because I've simplified my life, that goes right together. So what about all the people who put out of work? Well, maybe they don't have to be put out of work. They can work 20 hours instead of 40. Or in my case, you know, a lot of people in high tech will work 60 hours because they don't want to hire another person. So instead of 60, you work 40. Instead of 40, you work 20 or 30. And if you simplify at home, then it's easier to do. And, you know, I think we should have a sacred economy or a sharing economy where not everything we have to ask for money to do, you know. And a lot of us can help out in our neighborhoods and already are doing that. And the degrowth movement took off in Europe, and they had a conference back, I think, in 2014, 3,000 people from 74 nations attending. Pope, I just heard, been waiting. He's said he's going to put out an encyclical on climate change this summer, maybe in June, July it's going to come out. It was on the news yesterday. And he says, for the most part, it is man who continually slaps down nature. He says, some people continue to defend trickle-down theories which assume that economic growth encouraged by a free market will inevitably succeed in bringing about greater justice and inclusiveness in the world. This opinion, which has never been confirmed by the facts, expresses a crude and naive trust in the goodness of those wielding economic power and the sacralized workings of the prevailing economic system. Meanwhile, the excluded are still waiting. He sounds like a liberation theologist of the 80s, like Archbishop Romero, you know. That's what his words are sounding. They're sounding beautiful. He's saying at the UN, redistribute the wealth of the planet. This is like the sacred cow. You know, like America usually invades countries who want to do land reform or try to work toward equity. That's who we really got to go after that before that evil idea spreads that people should become out of poverty and have equity. So it's a very exciting time. Naomi Klein's book. Who's seen the book or read it? Read it. This changes everything. I'm about 2/3 into it. It's a great read, and she has some great things in here. The 3 pillars of neoliberal age: privatization of the public sphere, deregulation of the corporate sector, and lowering of income and corporate tax, paid for by cuts in spending. Together, these form the ecological pillar, the ecological wall that has blocked serious response to climate change for decades. And her book, you know, she says, forget everything that you think about global warming. The really inconvenient truth is that it's not about carbon, it's about capitalism. The convenient truth is that we can seize this existential crisis to transform our failed economic system and build something radically better. This book is New York Times nonfiction bestseller. Yeah. So, I feel like people are kind of waiting for this, and it's coming. More and more these ideas are getting into the mainstream, so I feel that's a great time. And people worry, grow or die. And this is, first, often people need a new story. That's how you shift culture. And when we let go of that story, that GDP has to rise for us to have a life, and to look at how do we make things efficient, and that's one way, but how about sufficient? It's enough. You can get a more efficient car and drive it twice as much, and you haven't done anything. So a lot of these efficiency things without lifestyle changes don't really make any difference. They just allow us to do whatever we're doing more. So the thing is that everyone's getting these days, and I've been doing this for 25 years talking about lifestyle changes, but in a positive, healthy, fun way. Now I see big speakers really wanting to talk about lifestyle changes. It used to be the big groups didn't want to even mention it as a possibility. And we know. I asked the head of the Chamber of Commerce in San Luis Obispo, California, when I used to live out there. I was the elected official for the Sierra Club of my region with 2,000 members, so every issue that would come up that was substantial, I would have to give public testimony in front of the city council or county board of supervisors. Then the Chamber of Commerce would usually be giving the exact opposite. We'd cancel each other out. But I made a point of talking to him outside the meeting and being friendly with him and not feeling like he was an adversary. So we would have really nice conversations. One day I asked him, how many people do you think the earth could support at an American lifestyle? And he said, probably about 700 million. That was like exactly my number. Yeah, like we should have under 1 billion people, And he got it, like his gut kind of got it, but he's still just like stuck in this ideology of growth economy. But I think he gets it, like that we can't all live like American. And do we want to see a world that's flooded with inequity? Some say, while others are in chains, no one's free. And I don't know if any of you feel that way, but I kind of do. It's hard for me just to swim in the lap of privilege while others don't have privilege. It's just really hard. It's just hard. And I think it's helpful for us to keep our compassion bones exercised. And I don't think we have to have suffering with degrowth. And if we do it right, we can make sure, like first, when I was in India, the communists in Kerala, India, what they did, instead of trying to make the middle class better, they said the middle class already has it defined. Like, I don't need anything from a politician to help me, I'm middle class. How about the one with no home, the one on the street, the one with no food, the one who was born with a birth defect, all the ones who are slipping through the cracks, that's who I want to be helped. And like, we just have to help people who need help, in our society. And the whole thing is, are we programmed just to populate, and that was a dominant idea. My mom had 9 children. She's read my book and given more books than mine away to friends. And, she would say when I started getting too much on my high horse, which one of your brothers and sisters do you wish wasn't born? So, but she gets it. She passed away 2 years ago, but she gets it that, she did it because she had a vision for a large family. She's Quebecois, and she always had the dream of having lots of kids, and she loved children. And we had a great childhood, but she knows now that she would never do that again, and she didn't understand the population dynamics. So whenever people have, some people say, oh, I feel bad or I feel guilty, I have 4 children, I'm like, well, once you have them, all you can do is love them, and stop your worrying and your feeling bad about yourself. Just feel good. And then, but you might talk to your daughters and your sons about something different, and explain how population dynamics work. So, it took 123 years to add 1 billion for my grandpa's time. For my dad's time, it took 32 years. Then for my time, it was 15 years. And Walden's time is now, 13 or 12 years to add another 1 billion. And, but I did the math when I did this experiment. I was trying to live on 1 acre of ecological footprint, which is like an Afghan. But it's the amount that if you calculate, if we each had a 1 acre ecological footprint instead of like an 18 acre Canadian or 20 acre American, at 1 acre we would actually have extinction rates the natural rate. You wouldn't accelerate extinction and there would be enough for everybody. So I tried to do this experiment for 7 months with our 2 other researchers, trying to personally live at 1 acre footprints. It was tough. What I realized is so tough that, well, the world would never embrace it. So I said, well, what about population? What if we reduced our population? So if you have 2-child families, the population will stabilize once the young will have their children, but it'd stabilize at 9 billion and we'll add another 2 billion. But if we had 3-child families, we'd grow to 30 billion, and then we'd have to have a 0.19 acre footprint, which is like burlap bags, like you wouldn't have much. 2-child families, we'd grow from a 1 acre down to 0.7 acres, so that's about half of an Afghan today, which is one of the poorest countries on earth. But if we were to have 1-child families out to 2,100, you would grow down to 1 billion. And it doesn't mean everyone has to have 1-child family, but that's the average. So a lot of people don't want to have kids, or they just feel like that's not their purpose. They may have smaller families, some may adopt, some may have 2 or 3 children, but we have an average of 1 child. If we did that out to 2,100, we would grow from 7 billion down to 1 billion. Now each person could actually have a 6-acre footprint, which is the current world average. So you wouldn't even have to reduce the current average footprint. You just have to distribute it better to eradicate poverty. And then in 2100, we could sail out with 2-child families for the rest of time with a 1 billion population and have a really easy job of sustainability, and it would be 80% of the wild lands would be wild. Right now we consume 150% of the earth. So by August, we've already used up everything the earth produces. So from August till December, we put the earth into overshoot. So we would go from overshooting the earth to leaving 80% of the earth wild just by doing 2 things. Small families for 100 years and footprints about 6 acre. So I've been trying to get mine to 1. 3 is actually pretty easy, and 6 is a lot easier. Like 6 acre footprints, you don't have to get rid of your car, you just use it kind of sparingly. Use your bike a bit, you combine trips, you don't go flying too much for vacation, like once in a while, but you don't do it as a habit. And you have a fairly small, well-insulated home, or you share your home with more people. And it's not really that hard. You eat local foods and don't buy a lot of new stuff and take care of the stuff you have, and you can just do fine with a 6 acre footprint. It's not heroics. It's not ecological heroics. It's basically a fairly easy way. And if you look at who is having small families, so you see 1-child families in Hong Kong, Singapore, Taiwan, Japan, 1.2. All of Eastern Europe you see there, Ukraine, Slovenia, Poland, and you see Europe, Spain, Greece, Germany, all the Eastern European countries are small families. Canada, 1.57, Cuba, 1.6, China, 1.73. So there's over 2 billion people already having a small family. So it's a trend that's happening that's actually one of the trends that's really helpful for the earth, like of all the bad. I mean, I told you enough of the bad things happening, but this is a good trend. And you see where the red is, that's the large families, 4 or more children, and that's where there's deep poverty. And it would be so easy to eradicate that poverty. And what they find, people who study, when women are in control of their own fertility, and women are educated out of poverty, they have small families. Like, it hasn't been this thing where everyone had 9 kids. Like, that was a Quebecois thing. It was a colonial thing. Like, let's make a lot of kids to work in the factories. It was Industrial Revolution time. But if you plug in the numbers and you go back in history and try to run a scenario, like you saw that population curve was flat for like centuries and centuries and centuries. It was flat because people had replacement fertility, and people say, oh, their life was horrible. Well, it wasn't horrible because it was horrible for some feudal times. But indigenous people, like around here, they would have like millions of salmon in the river. They have moose, buffalo. They have all the wild edible plants. Like, there's so much abundance of nature. Like, they had so much food available. And I actually calculated in North America they have 1,000 acres of footprint for each person available to them. But their ecological footprints were like 1 or 2 acres. 1,000 available, and they used 1 or 2. That was pre-conquest America. And they were like that for generations. And I spent a lot of time with indigenous people in Canada and America. and they say, oh, the seventh generation. They have a potlatch where they just share with everybody, and they give it away. And you see they have all these practices, just like when I was in India. They have a wedding in India. It's like 2,000 people come to the wedding. How do they do that? But they live on $400 a year. It's this generosity that goes around, and they still live very simple lives. It's just, so this is a possible future, and it's so easy. Just the wealthy take less and get happier with less. The poor come out of poverty. The women will have smaller families when their poverty is eradicated. And it's it's like a win-win. And the ball is self-reinforcing. And so, I'll show a few examples here of societies that have, so I show Cuba, Spain, and Kerala, India against Afghanistan. And I have on the left here, you see quality of life indices such as infant mortality and life expectancy and literacy. Those three things are something a scientist can measure. It's not like my opinion that Kerala has healthy children. They have 15 children dying out of 1,000 born. Afghanistan has 152. 152 is the most horrible situation you can imagine. 15, where India is 90, so Kerala has 15 children dying out of 1,000, and India has 90. So how did Kerala, India do that? How do they live to be 75 years old and have 91% literacy? And I just spent time in Cuba. They rank second in the world in literacy, and the U.S. is 34th, 35th. They have a lower infant mortality rate than America. They have longer lives than America, and they're doing it on a fraction of the ecological footprint. So I've been studying these people who have small families, healthy people, and small footprints. Like you could go to Europe and have very, small families and good social systems like Canada, but they also have big consumption. So those aren't people I want to learn from for the future that we're heading into. I want to learn from the ones with the healthy kids and small footprints. So here's my trip to Kerala, India. I just have a few slides. I was a researcher going there in the 90s to study low-impact lives in Kerala. And here you see the face of the girls tells a big story. If you go to India, most of India you would see the girls aren't going to look at you in the eye. They're going to look down at the dirt. And here they don't quite do that. They gauge you. They're smiling. And it just so happens that in Kerala they have 104 girls born to 100 boys. And if you look at all the poor countries, you get the data sheets on every country and how these ratios. Most countries it's 90 girls to 100 boys. China, India as a whole, Pakistan, 89, 90, 91 is called fatal daughter syndrome, or systematic deprivation of resources to girls in a post-colonial, patriarchal, dog-eat-dog world. Well, Kerala was a matriarchal society before the British, and then when they booted the British, they kind of went back to the matriarchal society. All the wealth, the eldest daughter would get the homestead. The women could actually have a second husband if they wanted one. If their own husband didn't behave, he would be booted out. And they have small families. And you see the men touching. So when I made friends there with the young men, we would walk through the village with their arm around me. And I was nervous at first because but no, it's not any kind of advances at all ever happened. Just a nice, beautiful friendliness that the men had. So I'd ask the men, and they're 25. I said, do you have a girlfriend? No. Do you want a girlfriend? No. Well, when are you going to get married? Well, not now. We like a peaceful, happy life. Come on, when are you going to get married? Well, when I'm 30 or 28. And I said, do you want arranged marriage or a love marriage? And they said, oh, arranged marriage. So we just think it's so naive that anyone would have an arranged marriage. But I was just like listening, not trying to judge, just listening. You see the playfulness of the people, the kidding and the fun, and then as a man, you don't hang out with women and when you go to Kerala, when you're in a village, because you could give a girl a bad reputation. So I was coached by the men in the village. So I hung out with these guys, and we would talk about everything in life that you can imagine, and it was just a beautiful thing to listen to them. I say, well, what do you want from life? Oh, we just want to have a nice life. Do you want a car? They say, no, a bicycle is fine, but this was the 90s before the TV became prevalent. And you see 60% of education, money is spent on education, healthcare, more libraries in all of India. And they did this movement since 1950s when they elected the first freely elected communist government, which India disbanded after a few years. But they basically promised land reform, and then 1.5 million poor got land. Instead of having to pay the rich landlord when they would have famine, they would be able to keep their own produce. So 40, 50 years later, there's not welfare. People have a little piece of land, they can grow food for their family and sell a little in the marketplace. Here's an open prison I visited in India. There's 280 murderers kept here, and the guards have no weapons, and there's no fence around the compound. And it was a Hindu holiday when I arrived. They're playing badminton, although these murderers. I had an interpreter with me, and I sat down for a lengthy interview with the guard. And I said, the first question is, well, what's the philosophy of the treatment of these prisoners? He says, well, we better treat them nice, they're all murderers. So 20 years, they've only had one escapee, one repeat offender. And this is a church, a mosque, and a Hindu temple all in one building, because the prisoners, they were trying to erase the ideas of a tension between religious groups, and also no matter what caste you are, you're here in prison. So they eradicate caste. Like a Hindu, a wise man said there should be only one caste, and he was like a guru for the people of Kerala. But then his disciples said there should be no caste. So in the 20s and 30s, they were having intercaste dinners. So like in our society, we have class system. I don't know how many parties of the janitors sits with the CEO in America, but in Kerala, they were doing that in the 30s. They were having cross-caste meals, and they were like, people would start to marry, any caste not important, and when they would want to find a partner. So they really been trying to break down things of the culture like that. And these are two tribal brothers, Chandran on the left and Happy Cherakin. And I would go into the regions of the Western Ghats and spend a week at a time with these two brothers, and they were still hunting and gathering, and their father was an Ayurvedic doctor, and they knew all the wild edible plants. And I teach wild edible plants where I live, like I take people out to forage from the stream sides and things. So these guys knew so much, and I would just pick their brains and hang out, live with them in their home. Now I'm going to switch to Cuba, and I was there 5 years ago, and it was the 50th anniversary of their revolution, which, if you read Castro's biography and Che Guevara's biography, what they were wanting to do is make life good for the farmer and the poor. That was the purpose of their revolution, and they wanted to get rid of Baptista, who was basically friendly to every U.S. huge corporation and export the wealth. And if you read their story, it's a harrowing journey to liberation. And so I get a bicycle. I spent like 5 days in Havana. Then I just wanted to get out to the countryside. I rented a bike from someone, and I biked all over the place. And here I come into this fruit stand, just like being in Kerala, India, because you always have the banana and the pineapple and everything. And I look at there's the farmers right there, and I start talking to them. Oh, I speak a little Spanish. Hola, ¿cómo está? And how is the growing this year? No, it's good. And then I always get to the question, because my dad always said we should attack Cuba and invade them and take it back and own it and be the colonial empire that controls them. So I asked these guys, because I was always told they collectivized everything and all the people wanted to swim to America, who's in Cuba. Everyone wants to swim to America. So I would ask them, are you a collective or privado? Do you own your farm? He said, oh, this is our land. Oh, well, who lived here before? Oh, my grandparents, great-grandparents. This is our land, family land, as far as we know. So I asked this question over and over and over again to the farmers, and I kind of was getting my whole father's information debunked, that he was telling us. And here I see the rice growing, and I grow my own grain many times at home. I grow most of my vegetables. And I saw this grain, and I used the sickle, and I see the guys in the field, and I'm like, oh, I just park the bike in the bushes and come over. The guys get out the bottle of rum, pour me a glass, and we start chit-chatting, how's it going? Oh, look at the rice. And they say, oh, it's a little dry here. This field is not doing so good. We have a low harvest, but, other places are really good, he's telling me, and a good harvest and this and that. And then I ask all these questions, and I get, oh, is this cooperative or cooperativo or privado? He said, oh, this is a cooperative. And I'm like, oh, do you like it? And he's like, oh, of course. Those guys who have their own field, they work all day long by themselves, and it's so horrible. We've been knowing each other, working our whole life together. We would hate to be have our own farm. We love being a cooperative. So, I got to hear both sides of it. And then you see the countryside still signs up. Viva Fideli Raul. This is the part of the, they right now have free education, free dental, and free medical for the whole nation. You can become a doctor, an engineer, a poet, a musician, and get college free. Like I paid every penny of my education, every filling of my mouth, except for 2 years working at Dartmouth College. I paid for every bit of dental work. I'm not complaining, but it should be free. You know, for me, it should be free. You know, it should be free. Education should be free for everyone. And instead of spending it on the military, we could just take a fraction and have all this. And then you see the rice everywhere being tended and dried. I saw in India, of course, too. And beautiful. And then I would ask this family, sitting on these sacks of grain, is this for sale? Por vende or por familia? Is this for your family? Oh, this is for our family. Look at that food security. That was what the revolution was about. It was about food security. And there they have it. This guy still has his commie hat on. And he was teasing me. You know, I was American, so he spoke so fast, so I couldn't understand it. But he was really ribbing me, I could tell. And his daughters were laughing, but it was all fun. Like, all conquistador. And he was saying these funny things, but he was not being mean to me. He was being playful with me. But it was fun. And I can see why he has the sign. Because his daughters have a better chance than my son, as far as having an easy, a life. You know, we know what it's like in America. These guys know what it's like in America. You come to California and see what it's like if you happen to move from Cuba to California, and then you're working in the field. 100 of you, and you're sleeping in a plywood shack with plywood beds and one bathroom for 50 or 100 people. My friend was an attorney for the farm workers. He actually found Mexican folks in chains in the fields in 1990, real live slavery happening in the fields of California. And it's not an isolated incident. You can go online and find out about these farms down south that have these conditions. These big butchering, Tyson Foods, all these big companies having horrible conditions for workers. And so then when my book got released in Spain, and I toured all over Spain by bike to represent my book, and I was on the Ramblas, and I see Che. And I'm like, the CIA didn't get him. I couldn't believe it. He was still there. And then when I got home, I said, I got to see what he really looked like, see if that was him. And I said, there he is. He's still alive. Che. And then when I would see the fields in Cuba, and I would watch, because I do this myself. I grow my own food. I don't have an animal. I'll do this work by myself with my own power. And I watched them dropping the seeds and walking. And it was poetry in motion for me, because I grow my own food. Watching them, I could watch for an hour and just be like, oh, this is just like, watching this. I didn't see any sweatshop agriculture there. It may be there, I just didn't see it. You know, and you see the corn and the beans growing together. This is, you see in the jungle, kind of their life still amongst the ecological system. This young boy is on his pony, and I'm biking along the road, and there's a young boy and I look over, his smile was so beautiful, you know. And so I see him take off up to the hillside, and I just throw the bike in the bushes and I go up the hill. I want to just talk to him and say hi. And then here's his dad. No suspicion of this gringo walking up the hill. Hola, ¿cómo está? How you doing? You know. Oh, marachini, you know, in India I saw this plant, marachini. It's tapioca root, and it's a very good tuber to grow. And I know a little bit about it, so I'm asking him about it and how it's going. And then I look over, there's his grandpa. 3 generations all there together working on the homestead. And I asked them the same questions. They said, as long as they remember, this is where their families land. And so Gandhi, you know, he said, we cannot build nonviolence on a factory civilization, but if it can be built on self-contained villages, this is, something I just wanted to report from the hinterlands, that there are some places that have done this. And right here, what I'd like to do is just take a minute to breathe, and, if anyone needs to use a bathroom, we said we'd have one part was like this talk about degrowth, and then we'd have a part that would be about Planet Living Challenge and how can we simplify our lives more. So the second half of this will be a little more like how to do it, a little more practical, like how do we reduce our own impact. So should I just keep going, or do people want to take 3 or 4 or 5 minutes, or have a few questions? How about I just take a few questions if there are any right now. If anyone wants to use the bathroom and come back, and I'll start the next slides in a few minutes, but if anyone has a question or, yeah. No, it didn't grow at all. Is it getting more bioproductive? Ooh, we been measuring that. No, because everything's getting a little depleted from the overuse, so it's actually going down, the productivity. Oh, okay. Thank you very much, NASA. And then you see if you all live like a Canadian, we need 4 Earth. That's an American, 5. And this is Dr. William Rees from UBC. I came back from India and I wanted to speak to him because I had seen a flyer of ecological footprint in 1993, I think. And I hunted him down at UBC. I called him up and I said, I've just got a slideshow from Carolyn. He invited me to speak to his master's class at UBC. I show up in the pouring rain on the bike, and who's at the bike rack in the pouring rain but Dr. William Rees? I'd never met him. And I look over and I say, oh, Bill, is that you? Oh, Jim. He wrote he's the department chair for, this is a university with 60,000 students. He's the chair of the Community Regional Planning Department, riding his bike to work. Totally gets it. He helped create the footprint model. Dr. Matisse Wackernagel was his PhD student. I was going to sleep in the university forest that night. He says, well, why don't you talk to Matisse? So I go and talk to Matisse. Oh, come on. It was just like being in Ottawa, because in Vancouver, then he had his bike, I had my bike, we biked back to his apartment, we got his painter bags on, we went to get organic food, we biked back to his house. We stayed up till like 3 in the night, every night, just talking and talking. We just were like soulmates. And so he ended up coming on our bike tours. We toured all over the universities. We do like 20, 30, 40 speaking gigs off our bikes. We did that for 6 years. And we go all the way down from the interior, from Nelson, over 7 mountain ranges, down into Vancouver, Victoria, down to Seattle, down to Portland, Oregon, and then California, and back, all the way back on the bike. 3 months on the bike, doing like dozens and dozens of speaking gigs. And Matisse would come with us and talk to university groups about this whole idea of ecological footprinting. Basically, looking at our economy and how much area is needed to supply the resource and absorb the waste. So it's pretty simple. Basically, we know how to be sustainable now. Humanity's consumption, how much we consume is compared to what the earth can generate. If you do it sustainably on the right, it'll go on forever with the full earth, and human is sharing in the overflow, the abundance that nature creates through primary productivity of the sun hitting the green. But with technology, we're draining the earth's capital or hurting the earth, damaging it through overuse. So, it's really a mechanistic linear model, which I'm not into linear models. I still use it. It's got its weaknesses and its strengths. So I'll share some of its strengths and weaknesses, but it's looking at the use of net primary productivity or biomass or bioproductivity or green life. They use many names for it. It's a little mechanistic, but it's saying how much do we use. So it's adding it up for, you see the forest to sequester the carbon from all our fossil fuel burning, built up land to absorb wastes, to provide food and provide fibers and building materials. And there's also a category for wilderness that we've created. But it's a very powerful methodology, and it started in UBC, and then it went around the world, and now the data's been collected since 95 or 96 on like 150 nations, 5,000 data points in their database, but it still doesn't account for like ecosystem services like water purification, all these things that wildlife and untouched nature gives you for free. Nature gives 17 services, this group from the Gund Institute has determined, that's for free. So that if you add up the money you make, if you had to do it with money to buy what the nature is doing to like provide clean water and all these things, you would it's like $33 trillion that nature is giving us free if we just leave it alone. So really, when you do the math, just leaving nature alone as much as you can. And I've in my book Radical Simplicity, I identified the 3 terms of equity. Because the footprint is a little like just what do humans need? So I asked the question, well, how much of the earth do we need to leave wild for the extinction rate to be its natural level, not the level it is now? And so, I've asked that question in my research, and of actually 1,000 groups. I asked them, what is your opinion? How much, from your heart of hearts, do you think is a fair amount for humans to consume versus all the other life? after asking it 1,000 times, I got the average of the people in North America, even the electrical engineering students give the same answers. They think 80% should be left alone. That humans should only use about 20% of the Earth's bioproductivity. I thought it's pretty enlightening. People know how much should be left wild. So if you take what exists, which is 4¼ acres, that's how much each of us have. If we just divide up all the Earth's productive areas by the people, we each get about a 4¼ acre, and you multiply it by 0.2. That means leaving 80% wild, just using. So we have to learn to live on about 1 acre. And then I put together this idea of interhuman equity. What's my fair share to take from the planet? I'm one of 7 billion people. And what would be a fair amount for me to take? And I've asked this question of 1,000 audiences. If you want to take the same as everyone on the earth, you stand in the middle. If you want more than the average person, stand to the right. If you want less than the average, stand to the left. You might want more because you're hungry and big and strong and you're an athlete, or you just might want more because you want more. You might want less because you know people with a disability and you want to take a little less because you're healthy. And then those who need a little more, for whatever reason, can have a little more. When I ask this question, the average person takes a little less than the full share, and that's all the world's people. So I'm getting in touch with their ethical system. I've asked this of 1,000 groups, and people stand a little to the less than a full share. Then I asked them intergenerational equity. Do you want to use everything the earth produces, or do you want to leave a little buffer for the future, like a fallow field? So you won't fully utilize it. You know, you have a part of your homestead that you don't take, so you underconsume so that future generations have a restored earth. If you use so I say you stand in the middle if you think you just take everything the earth uses. If you stand to the right, we would restore the earth by 10%, 20%, 30%. You stand where it feels right. We should have a restoration rate. Or if you want to stand to the left, you'd have a depletion rate. So we're slightly depleting the earth for the future generations. So the people always come to like 20% restoration rate. So with those 3 questions, you multiply each factor times what footprint is of it, how many acres are available, and you get a sustainability goal. So that's a personal goal based on our ethics. But you can use science to measure, because science can't tell us how to share. Science can tell us how much nature is there, but in the end, we have to decide how much we'll use. That's an ethical question. So then we have to engage our ethical engines and decide, like, what feels good to me. And so the footprint has national accounts, then regional applications, and then a personal footprint calculator. When I put into my book the whole system of doing your own footprint, in the privacy of your own home, it's all in these tables in the back. And Matisse did all the research for it while he was working on redefining progress, and he didn't charge me for putting all that research into the system of ecological footprint. It's in radical simplicity. So in the appendix, you can do your own footprint if you want, or you can go online and do an online calculator with like 15 or 20 questions, and it'll take you like 20 minutes to do it, and you'll get a ballpark of how big your footprint is. And it'll tell you how many Earths would be needed to live your lifestyle. When people do it, they often find, oh man, I need 3 Earths, you know, and they go, oh boy, what am I going to do now? Get a few more Earths. So this is the footprint. They have a World Overshoot Day. So right now we're at 150% of what the Earth generates. So I mentioned that earlier. So if you take the 30 billion acres of bioproductive area, that's taking away the deep oceans, the deserts, the ice caps, and the already built up land, what's left is a biologically productive land, and you divide that by the world's population of 7 billion, we each get a 4¼ acre personal planetoid. But that assumes that humans eat the entire ecological enchilada. 25 million other species would have nothing to eat. You say, well, I'll share with another species. But it's a nice gesture to say, hey, you want to share a sandwich? Well, we each get half, right? So you can share with the deer, but what I eat, the deer can't eat. So basically, when I consume bioproductivity, there's another species so humanity can fill every ecological niche right now, right? And convert it into fields to grow food for humans, or for our livestock, which is again to feed humans. So, so that's why I felt it was necessary to ask the question: how much do we want to leave wild? So if you leave 80% wild, you have the 1 acre footprint. There's what exists, 4¼ We use 6.5. So a Canadian is at 17.5. You can see a Cuban is just about what exists. India, 2 acre only. And in Kerala, they have about the 2-acre footprint with a high quality of life. So what we've learned is that people that have very high quality of life at small footprints, it is possible. Doesn't have to be suffering. And the data shows this is produced every year. You can get it for free online. It's called a Living Planet Report, and it's produced every year by World Wildlife Fund, WWF. This is the footprint of all these nations. America is right up here toward the top. Canada is down a little bit, like about the 10th down. And that shows the poor countries. And your household is a good thing to get started with because you can manage it. It's pretty easy, but I've done footprints of whole college campuses. You can do a footprint of a state. You can do a conference where people come together. They've asked me to do the footprint of the conference. I've gotten high schoolers to do it. Footprint of their school in 3 hours. Students can go and measure how many light bulbs and count all the books in the library. You get 1 foot of books. You weigh it on a scale, then you measure how many linear feet of bookshelves, and you multiply it by your pounds of books per 1 foot of books, and then they get how many pounds of paper and how long the books last, and then they divide it over its useful life, and they get a footprint. And 9th grader students will do all the math better than a master's student, because I've done it with both groups. And then you have to measure things. You have to quantify, like, what is my footprint? Because I'm a recovering engineer. Now, one thing I didn't like is this hot air balloon. Like, I'm sustainable. Why are you sustainable? Well, I am, And that just offended me all the time. Like, I want to be able to calculate and show you that this is my footprint without lying to you or misrepresenting myself. So I have to do measurements. Now we have technology. Micro system. Don't send me a report. Just crashed. Oh, here we are, we're back. So the national accounts for the footprint are actually quite strong because you know how much oil we use. We know how much we import, how much we export, how much we produce nationally. So it's basically an domestic production plus imports minus exports equals your national consumption. So it's very easy to know how much fuel we use, how much timber, how much minerals, how much precious metals, all those things, because all that data is kept at a national level for like every nation. Really easy to know your footprint because then you just divide it by all the people. But all of us have a little military footprint, a healthcare footprint, roads, infrastructure footprint. But then to do the personal accounts, what you need to do is you get yield data, which is like pounds of potatoes. How many pounds of potatoes can you grow per acre using standard practices, right? So that's yield data here for the personal accounts. You add to that the embodied energy. Embodied energy is like, if you were to analyze this structure right in front of me here, how much resource energy would it take to make all these parts, plate them, subcontractors, making all these pieces, the insurance, keeping the employees happy, all that. And then you have to sell it in a store, and then you have to go and drive to it. Embodied energy tallies all that energy up that you need to make anything consumable. So there's researchers at universities who study all these things. Too much, it would make you crazy to look at all the data, but there it is. And I just used it. So there you have it, embodied energy, and then you calibrate it. And because not everything, like if you want to know the footprint of this book or your computer, you can just weigh the computer and plug it into a sheet on my book and you'll get the footprint. It won't be exact, but it will be in the ballpark of electronics, paper, synthetics. So here's for food, veggies, potatoes, and fruit. All you need to do is put the amount per month. You put like 20 pounds of potatoes times 33, you get 660. In a metric system, if you're using metric, you would use kg. And so if it was 10 pounds, you would put 630 square meters, right? If you're working veggies, fruit in a metric system, 10 pounds of potatoes and veggies and fruit times the 63. It's as simple as that. It's very simple to do your own ecological footprint. And it's pretty simple because you can see the difference. Like if you're eating meat, you have a bigger footprint. You can see beef is like a 1,180. Fish is 2,790. Vegetable is 33. So that's why, you know, people are trying to convince us to be vegetarian for many years or eat less meat because, you know, a cow is walking around all day metabolizing and it's putting off heat. You ever hear like the old light bulb was hot and the new light bulbs are cool, right? The old incandescent bulb would burn you. They say we want light, not heat, right? So the heat is the waste of the system. You get an LED bulb, you won't feel any heat, but it's putting out as much light because they're more efficient in turning electricity into light. A cow is very inefficient because all the heat it's giving off all day long is waste. You don't want heat, you want food. So you could feed 33 times more people if you were eating vegetarian from the same unit of land area, more or less, like vegetarian versus meat eater. So with 7 billion people, that's why, you know, Frances Moore LePay wrote the books in the 60s, Diet for a Small Planet, and she was showing the math and the information about, and if you don't want to be a vegetarian fully, but you just reduce the quantity, you probably will live longer, be healthier for you, but just, and stay away from beef as much as you can. Poultry you see is a much smaller footprint. It's 335 versus 1,180 for beef. So, you know, or eggs, and there are things that you could eat that are still meat-based, and doing a little less, that you can get a quite small footprint and not be, say, strict vegetarian. But the footprint just gives you information. So to me, it's not like right or wrong, it's just information. So I drink coffee, and I had students giving me grief, you know, out of college. Oh, you're drinking coffee and the beans, and they come from all far away, and you're drinking. And I'm like, you're right, it's a footprint. I put it right on my sheet. But then I also will drive the car less, leave the park for a week at a time. You know, so you choose, pick and choose. So the footprint doesn't tell you how to live. It just says, what are you doing? And then you look at that information and you decide personally in the privacy of your own home what you want to do with it. And we like to say when we do this as groups, there's no eco-police. So we had 5 research teams of college students and university professors living with us up in the mountains of British Columbia. They arrive, they take their backpack off, and they spread everything out and do the footprint analysis of everything they carried in. And everything we use for the whole 6 weeks, we monitor the footprint. We make a fire, we put the wood where your foot go on the bath scale, you put 2 logs of wood, and you put 2 go across and 2 up. And all that wood we're going to burn in a fire tonight to keep us warm and have it fun and sing and play guitar around the fire. But we put the footprint of the burning the wood on our sheets. So at the end of 6 weeks, we knew exactly what our footprint was. You could take a shower for 6 hours. And there was a shower that was the electricity, what they call hydro. In BC, they call it hydro, because there's a lot of hydroelectric. You put the footprint for the hydroelectric. Or if you want to wait for the sun and take a hot solar shower, you put your footprint for the solar shower. But you could sit in the shower for 10 hours, we didn't care. You just put the number down on your sheet. So no eco-police, and the people would get their footprint down to 3 acres, like almost everyone in the team, on their own accord. And behind the scenes, there's a lot of math that happens in the footprint. So for example, like, if you just say all the cropland is on the earth, the average productivity of cropland is 1. You say the average forest productivity is 1, you just make it up. So then you see Algeria has only, their cropland is only 6/10 as productive as, say, Hungary is 1.1, Guatemala is 1, so they have the average. So if you're in a country that has poor soil like Zambia, your footprint will account for that. You won't be docked for having poor land. And then they have equivalence factors, so, you know, if you say all the land is equal to 1 productivity, the cropland is 2 times as productive as the forest areas are 1.34, and in pasture, permanent pasture, where you wouldn't grow crops because it's too dry, would be 0.49. And so this way you can adjust and know what you can actually run the math to calculate the footprint. So there's a lot happening behind the scene, but when you do what's in my book, you don't have to know any of that. You just plug in the numbers and go. And it has limitations because it doesn't include like nuclear power or effects of complex natural systems and all that. So it's giving you some ideas, but like, for example, Vancouver shows the red area is Vancouver, but there's the size of their footprint. And a PhD student, Yoshivada, he went to UBC, he's from Japan, he did this footprint of tomatoes in a greenhouse versus open field. So you see the greenhouse is 15 times more footprint than growing in open field, because you have to buy the glass, you have to heat it, you have to supply all the inputs. Even though you get 7 times the productivity inside the greenhouse for land, it's 15 times bigger footprint, because the footprint is just everywhere else, not here in the site. So, and he also did the footprint of fish. And then when we go, this is us on the road with bikes and doing footprints of conferences. And the big piece is looking at how do we shrink our footprint. And this is me who's like perpetually doing silly things. I'm gonna build a house, so I need to buy a sawmill first, because I can't buy wood from clear cuts, because I lived in British Columbia for 7 years, blockading roads for 7 years, stopping clear cuts in the Spokane Valley. So I did my own little mini clear cut around my yard, which still hurts, but bought a sawmill and milled up all the lumber and did the timber framing and got buddies to help and built a root cellar first. So that's right now right behind our house, but it stores all our food for the winter that we grow. It's 6 inches of styrofoam pad underneath the entire foundation to give it super insulation. And the walls are a foot thick. It's a double wall. All this wood is wood we milled on the site. And I got a hold of a guy who worked with his dad for 15 years now, and he's like only 30 years old now, but he's built a ton of these passive houses. So he helped me with the house a bit, doing some of the carpentry. And we used local cedar shingles that were made from a mill just 30 miles from our house, and putting linseed oil on, and then we're moving in, finished concrete floor, and all the wood trim inside we made from our own mill and planer, and there we are, Walden and I, having breakfast. See the root cellar behind the house. It's big, built into the bank. Right now it's about 40 degrees in there with just air temperature, no cooling. And I have a fan that blows cold air at night. So every time the fan senses the air goes below 10 degrees below what the inside temperature is, the outside goes 10 degrees below the inside, it blows the fan automatically. So it's a little tiny controller that I put in there. And then it's a freeze protection, so if it gets to 33, it'll shut off. But that makes it colder like another month each year. Earlier in the fall and later in the spring. And there's the wood stove. This heats our hot water, cooks our food, and heats the whole house. There's the door into the root cellar. I just opened the door so you could see our produce in the bin. So you walk right through the kitchen, you get into the root cellar, you don't have to get your feet dirty, and you go in there, and potatoes right now are just as good as when you put them in. Carrots, beets, cabbages are looking a little furry. You take the few outer leaves off, and we made lots of sauerkraut and stuff like that this year. And there's our chicken tractor and our well. We had a hand pump for the first 3 years. We lived in a yurt while we built the house. So, but now there's a pump way down there that runs off of those solar panels. So the 2 panels on the left are hot water panels. The rest are photovoltaic that I bought used, some of them and some new. It's a fairly small system, but we can do 2 loads of laundry on a sunny day, and then by like 1 o'clock in the afternoon, the batteries are fully charged again. So if there's 4 days of clouds, you don't do any laundry, and you just wait till you have a sunny day. Because we have no dryer, we just hang it up out in the yard. You see the clothesline from the porch upstairs. There's the woodshed over to the right, so this is what I call homeland security. Just having a woodshed full of, and I'll just summarize with 14 ways to degrow. One is to really plant yourself, whether it's in the city or the country. I really love your question because I don't advocate either way. Wherever you're happy, I feel that you should go. And you can do it, beautiful, simple life either way. But if you're in a place that you like and inspires you and you're near your work, you don't have to be in a car all the time. So that one choice will really impact your overall footprint. And then lowering your own footprint is a really good thing to do. Reduce, reuse, refuse, rethink, rebuild, rebel, recycle. And there's a conference coming up I heard about right in near here that's all about rebuild, rewild. And there's a young lady here, and I forgot your name already. What's your name? Maria Helena, and she's an organizer with this conference that's happening this summer in June.
It's not really a conference.
It's not a conference.
Yeah, it's more of a camp.
A camp. So if you want to learn some of this stuff, there's people around you. And then smaller families, you know, 1 children, 2 children, adopt later in life. All these things are helpful for the Earth. Shifting to alternative transportation. This shows the footprint of a cycle versus a bus versus a car. But even if you say, well, for some reason you cannot use the bike for whatever reason, if you have 2 in the car, you have the area of the car. And then if you use the car half as much, because like you don't forget the milk or whatever, you're to 1/4. And if you have a car that gets double the kg, you're to 1/8 the footprint of that area, and you're still using the car, but you always have 2 people in it. And then if you put 4 in the car, you're to 1/16. You know, so you can be a car driver and still have a very small footprint, or you know, enjoy fossil fuel-free fun. And I like to say there's infinite ways to have fun, right? There's infinite of those will be really polluting, and then there's infinite that are not impactful at all, no impact. So we still have infinite to choose from. So I think infinite is pretty cool, isn't it? Like, that's a lot, huh? Infinite. And then this is a straw bale house that I built in British Columbia for $1,500. But you know, I don't really advocate you go build a straw bale house, but if you have a house that's maybe bigger than you need, you know, you can downsize. You can just, you know, have a student who maybe wants to move in with you, or a friend or something over time. Maybe this isn't the right time, but sometime in life you might decide to downsize or fill the house more. There's lots of ways to do it. People insulate their house, do co-housing, do more community living. This is a passive house in New York City that they say will rent for $600 a month. This is, say, number 7 thing to degrow is shoot your television. And tune into alternative media, boycott, you know, polluting, irresponsible products and services, and then really support the local board, the local organic, the free trade, the fair trade, all those things that you know about, support. I like to say it's important to meditate and relax and enjoy, because sometimes just ourselves being stressed and anxious and having fear and worrying, like people say, oh, I don't know what will happen when I get older. Like, how will I have security? So they feel like, even in America, you have so much, and then they still feel like they're still not secure. They don't feel secure when they get old. So there's a fear that's generated somehow, and I feel like you can overcome the fear by being present and breathing and relaxing and cultivating that peaceful feeling, because you sometimes just taking that deep breath and calming yourself may curb an impulse to just go buy something because you're depressed or you had a bad day or whatever. Just take a deep breath in and out, let yourself feel lovely, light, airy, smiling, happy, joyful, thankful. You have your partner at home, you have a roof over your head, you have food, you don't hear bombs going off anywhere, you know, and you're happy and just feel good. And then I say agitate, you know, inside the system, outside the system, create a new system, apply friction, dismantle, you know, whatever way is right for you. I wouldn't advise anyone to do it unless it didn't feel right, you know. So some can work inside the system. I'm like, take my hat off to them. Some can't, because it'll eat them alive to work inside the system, so get out. You know, if you're feeling eaten alive, get out. And then, you know, activate, you know, engage in societal solutions. And I say take an equalizer. You know, once in a while it's good to take an equalizer. Just imagine that you had no food, no friends, no freedom, hearing bombs. So just once in a while it helps us to put ourselves in context. And then falling in love with the earth to me is the most powerful thing that I've ever done. And I'm going to ask a personal question here, but how many here has ever fallen in love? Let me see your hands. Okay, I think almost everyone here has fallen in love at least once. Now, if you remember back the first week when you fell in love, can anybody remember that time? What it was like when you first fell in love? Like, did you feel pretty light and alive? And did you try something you never thought you'd ever try? And, you know, make big changes, and you drive across the whole province, or, you know, big phone bill, stay up late, go for walks on the beach till 2 in the morning. And it never feels like a sacrifice, right? Because you're in love. And I feel like when we fall in love with the earth the same way, all these changes will be so easy for us. You know, we'll just automatically just make these changes. And the give and take of the planet is so beautiful. And, you know, degrowth is possible and pragmatic, possibly beautiful, realistic, and resilient. ethical and enlivening, fun and feasible, and best of all, it's a path with a future. So thank you very much for listening.